King Green is back, and he's going to be fighting Grant Dawson, the lightweight division's human backpack, this weekend. And I'm going to be giving my full card predictions for all the best fights on this card. And guys, we have a lot of fighters that are on the chopping block. We have a lot of guys that have their backs up against the wall that are kind of fighting for their UFC career. You know, Drew Dober just getting KO'd in his last fight. He's not fighting for his career, but I want to see how he's going to bounce back. But we also have a guy like Cutelaba, who's back as well, who always seems to be on the chopping block. He's always like one fight away from getting cut. And we also have Alexander Hernandez in a similar position. Lots of really good competitive matchups. Chris Gutierrez versus Montel Jackson. We have a lot of excellent fights to break down. So let's just get into them. Guys, if you just want to hear my particular take on one of these fights, make sure to go to the timestamps in the description. And guys, without further ado, let's get into it. Montel Jackson versus Chris Gutierrez. Guys, I'm going to be going with Montel Jackson. I think that he's going to knock down Chris Gutierrez in this fight, and I think he's probably going to win a decision. Now, here's the thing. Montel Jackson, if you guys haven't been watching this guy's career, he's known for knocking down basically all of his opponents. Like, he has some of the best power in the bantamweight division, tons of power in his hands. Chris Gutierrez, not so much. I feel like this dude's power is a little bit overrated, and I think that people were overrating him a little bit after that Frankie Edgar fight because, listen, I understand that if you're going to look at both of these guys' records, Gutierrez is the guy that on paper has fought better levels of competition. Frankie Edgar and then Pedro Munoz. And Pedro Munoz is a guy that Chris Gutierrez had a close decision with. You know what I mean? But I think that's just a stylistic matchup right there because Montel Jackson, he's got like double the reach of Pedro Munoz. And I think he's going to be able to drop Chris Gutierrez, who we did see get dropped against Pedro Munoz. And I don't think that Chris Gutierrez is going to have any advantage other than the kicking game. And the only way in which Chris Gutierrez can win this fight, in my opinion, is if he just outpoints Montel Jackson at range with pitter-pat kicks for 3 rounds. That seems to kind of be his bread and butter style, especially against guys that aren't just going to be a sitting duck waiting to get flying knee KO'd. And I just think that Montel Jackson's going to be able to sit there in the pocket with him, or is going to be able to stand there and trade with him on the feet. And I think he's going to land the better shots. And it's only going to be a matter of time before Montel Jackson lands a knockdown or two. So I think that Montel Jackson is probably going to win this fight. I just don't really see great finishing ability from Chris Gutierrez, to be honest. Like, I know that he's had a couple of finishes, but again, it's like, who is he finishing? Montel Jackson's tough. He's got a good chin. He's got decent wrestling. I don't think that the grappling is really going to play into this fight, so I will be going with Montel Jackson to win this one. And I think he's just going to hurt Chris Gutierrez a few times. So yeah, let's go on to the next fight. Alexander Hernandez versus Bill Algeo. This is a fight at featherweight. Alexander Hernandez is moving back down to the featherweight division, which is interesting because, again, you know, he did just have a questionable performance against Jim Miller, but before that had gotten brutally finished by Billy Quarantillo at featherweight. You know what I mean? And before that, we've seen Alexander Hernandez get finished by guys like Drew Dober, and we've seen him get finished by guys like Donald Cerrone back in the day. I feel like Alexander Hernandez, I don't know if I could trust him here, man, because when you're just constantly moving up and down divisions and not being too sure, oh, maybe the weight cut was too hard, maybe my chin was deteriorated the last time I jumped down, and then I'm going to move back up and fight Jim Miller and have a close performance against Jim Miller, who's like 48 years old, and then I'm going to move back down. It's like, where's the stability? You know what I mean? At some point, I feel like maybe it's just a skill thing. You know, maybe he's just not good enough to beat guys, and that's that. And honestly, I know Bill Algeo ain't that impressive, but he's coming off of a decent win over TJ Brown, a guy that he knocked down, hurt badly, and then ended up submitting. Thing about Alexander Hernandez and his last performance, it just looks sloppy. You know what I mean? I feel like this guy doesn't have that same pop that he used to. I feel like people are reading him like a book. I don't know what it is. He's completely lost his mystique. Jim Miller is a tough opponent. You know, regardless of the fact that he's in his 40s, he is still a tough guy. 100%. He's got some power. He's definitely got a good chin. I think Bill Algeo's got a pretty good chin. I saw him eat some really big shots in his last fight against TJ Brown. He's going to have a reach advantage. He's going to have a height advantage. Yeah, he's a little bit, you know, he's a little older than Alexander Hernandez. He might not be as fast. He may not be as explosive. But I could see him catching Alexander Hernandez in the second, maybe third round, and maybe just putting him away or wrapping him up in a submission. I think that Alexander Hernandez, whenever this guy wrestles, he tires himself out big time. And I'm just kind of liking Bill Algeo's ability to weather a storm early and be able to hurt and finish Alexander Hernandez in maybe the second and the third. I just can't be impressed by Hernandez at this point in his career. Now, the thing is, this is a step down in competition. I do have to make note of that. For Alexander Hernandez, for the most part, he's been fighting guys that are above the level of Bill Algeo. But let me look at the record of Bill Algeo really quickly and just see, again, like before TJ Brown, he had a close fight with Andre Fili. He beat the shit out of Herbert Burns, gassed Herbert Burns out. So I honestly feel like, you know, having a close fight with Andre Fili is not a bad look. Andre Fili just had a close fight with Nathaniel Wood, and he destroyed Herbert Burns. I remember I actually went to that event in Long Island, and the first fight that I ever saw live in person, I walked into the stadium and I saw Bill Algeo beating the crap out of Herbert Burns on the ground. I remember that very moment. And then I rewatched the fight afterwards. And like, again, this dude has a really good ability to survive. Herbert Burns was winning that fight early on. I think he's going to weather the storm, and I think he's going to beat Alexander Hernandez by a finish in the second and third. On to the next. Ion Cutelaba versus Philipe Lins. All right. I'm going to go with Ion Cutelaba in this fight, and I'm going to pick him to win this one via first round ground and pound TKO. That's right. I think that although Philipe Lins is a former heavyweight that's definitely going to be a big guy in there, I think that we've seen time and time again when heavyweights move down, they don't do well. Ion Cutelaba literally just showed this in his last fight, knocking out Tanner Boser, a guy that moved down from the heavyweight division. Philipe Lins, listen, man, didn't look good at all against Maxime Grishin. Did not look good at all against Maxime Grishin. You know, got a win over OSP. Not that impressive to beat OSP at this point. Marcin Prachnio's mid, and of course we saw him take Marcin Prachnio to a decision. I just don't think that Philipe Lins has the consistent finishing ability to go out there and finish Ion Cutelaba. The people that are finishing Ion Cutelaba are guys like Kennedy Nezuchuku. You know what I mean? The people that are finishing Ion Cutelaba are like the bigger light heavyweights that are top 10 guys. Johnny Walker, you know what I mean? Ryan Spann, Magomed Ankalaev. I don't think that Philipe Lins is on this level, especially if you take into account that he's a former heavyweight. He's going to be slower. His grappling is not going to be up to par. The heavyweights just tend to be lazier in general when it comes to grappling. And I think that Ion Cutelaba is going to get a hold of Philipe Lins, and he's just going to be a step ahead of him on the ground. I think he's going to take him down, and I think he's going to beat the shit out of him. And Ion Cutelaba in the first round, even though if it goes past the first, he drops off of a cliff, and his fight IQ, horrible fight IQ, tends to get in the way of his victories because he always ends up making a mistake when he gets a little bit tired. But early on, Ion Cutelaba is one of the most dangerous men in that division. And I think he has a good chance to beat Philipe Lins. Ion Cutelaba could honestly finish anyone in this division. And I think he is going to get this one done. First round, TKO on the ground. Ricky Glenn and Drew Dober. All right. This is a massive step down in competition for Drew Dober. Going from fighting Matt Frevola, who is one of the most explosive, hardest hitters in the 155-pound division. Wild techniques, has grappling, has good wrestling base, good cardio as well, knows how to push a pace. It's honestly an amazing drop-off in competition, and I think that Drew Dober is going to absolutely smoke Ricky Glenn. I think he's going to walk across the octagon. He's going to put a pace on Ricky Glenn, and at the end of the day, there's something that separates people like Drew Dober from Ricky Glenn, and that is the ability to impose your will. And the times in which we see this the most is when we see a guy taking a step down in competition. This is a massive step down. I mean, I don't know the last time Drew Dober fought anyone at this level. It may have even been Alexander Hernandez. And it's kind of crazy to say Hernandez is at the same level as Ricky Glenn these days, but that's honestly the truth. Ricky Glenn, he's had a couple of okay showings. The only thing this guy has going for him is the fact that he's got some decent survivability and some okay cardio. You know what I mean? He's got a first round KO recently. I forget the guy that he knocked out. Let me just look at his record. He knocked out Joaquin Silva, who's the guy that honestly had Arman Tsarukyan hurt a little bit in their first or second round. But again, we've seen him coming off of a knockout loss against Christos Giagos. So he just got KO'd by Christos Giagos. Christos Giagos is not even close to Drew Dober's level of striking. The thing is, though, with Dober, he's getting up there in age. He's in his mid-30s now. He's taken a lot of damage. He has a heavy damage style. He's going to get in people's faces. He's not afraid to get hit. And because of that, maybe his chin is going to be deteriorating. And I've noticed that when the guys that are in the rankings drop off, they drop off a lot harder than people like Ricky Glenn that are never going to get to the rankings to begin with. And I just think that's the meat grinder of the rankings in the lightweight division, or any division for that matter. The rankings, you're going to be fighting 5-rounders. You're going to be training harder. You're going to be sparring harder. Just because once you get up there in the top 15 in the world in any division, it gets a lot more serious. You know, your opponents are taking everything more serious. But I think that Drew Dober is just a cut above. I think his level of competition shits all over that of Ricky Glenn. And I think that Ricky Glenn is like the perfect example of just an NPC guy that just happens to be in the UFC, but we don't even know how. You know what I mean? I think he's just there to be fighting the Dana White Contender Series alum people when they have their second fight in the UFC. That's what Ricky Glenn is. Drew Dober's going from fighting Matt Frevola to Ricky Glenn. I'm going to pick him to win this fight by first or second round KO. Brutal KO. Going to walk across the octagon. Speed's going to be too much. Kickboxing is going to be too much. On to the next one, Joaquin Buckley versus Alex Morono. Now, here's the thing, guys. I'm always impressed when I rewatch Alex Morono fights, especially the fight that I rewatched of him and Tim Means, knocking out Tim Means, the guy that just knocked out the guy that Joaquin Buckley just knocked out, which is Tim Means knocking out Andre Fialho. Bro, Alex Morono's got some really good power in his hands. He's the better boxer than Joaquin Buckley, and I feel like if these guys are trading in the pocket, at least after the first few minutes of this fight, you know, when Joaquin Buckley, some of the explosiveness that he has gone out the window a little bit, I think that Alex Morono is going to be the better, more dangerous gunslinger in the pocket. That being said, I am going to pick Joaquin Buckley to win this fight by decision because he still has decent power. I don't think he's got anything crazy, and he's got the ability to level change. I've seen Joaquin Buckley take people down like Abdul Razak Alhassan, who's a pretty good grappler in his own right, but pretty strong guy. Joaquin Buckley's been able to do just fine in grappling sequences with guys like Albert Duraev. And I think that Joaquin Buckley, the thing that, in my opinion, makes him seem unimpressive is actually what's going to get him to win the fight. And what I mean is this. I don't want Joaquin Buckley sitting in the pocket with Alex Morono. I think that people sleep on Alex Morono because if you just look at the guy, he looks like an unassuming, 45-year-old math teacher that's never worked out a goddamn day in his life. But he has really good pop in his hands. He's got really good power. I just think that Joaquin Buckley's style isn't sitting in the pocket anymore. I feel like he's learned his lesson from fighting guys like Chris Curtis. I feel like Joaquin Buckley has learned his lesson from getting knocked out by Alessio Di Chirico. Now, don't get me wrong, that was a head kick, I understand. But I feel like Joaquin Buckley fights a lot safer these days, and because of it, I feel like he's not as good as imposing his will on the feet. And what I mean is, Joaquin Buckley is kind of like a 170-pound Guram Cutelaba that just kind of floats out there, does a whole load of fancy schmancy movement, and having no ability to actually invest and hurt and break down his opponents in the course of a fight. Like, you'll see Joaquin Buckley have the most random shot selection, all these massive, massive movements, over-accentuated head movement when he's clearly out at range. I feel like he tries to be a little bit too fancy for his own good, and in the process, he ends up just not being able to actually get anything going on the feet other than points. He's a point guy if you get past the power, and I don't think the power is something that's that amazing. I think that Joaquin Buckley is going to be sitting out at range. He's going to be rushing in to land a leg kick, maybe a body kick every now and then. He's going to land a good jab. He's going to get out of the way. And I think he's just going to make it a point not to sit in the pocket with Alex Morono. And I think he is going to just run up points on the board. If the going gets tough, he'll level change. And that's it. But this is something that's only going to work when you're fighting Alex Morono, when you're fighting people at that level, maybe an Andre Fialho, who he did knock out with a head kick, and that was pretty interesting. But Fialho at this point, his chin ain't the same. He's just not the same guy. I think that if Joaquin Buckley is going to move up the rankings, let's say he were to fight a JDM, a guy that knows how to impose his will, that knows how to break someone down, that has a very cut and dry method to beating someone that works because they're very good at what they do and it's hard to stop. I think that Joaquin Buckley would get smoked by someone like JDM. I think that Joaquin Buckley would get smoked by someone like Ian Gary. You know what I mean? I think he'd get smoked by someone like Shavkat or one of the higher ranked welterweights. But I do think he's going to have enough to beat Alex Morono. Because again, if you're one, I've already said this before, imposing your will is massive. You know what I mean? It's massive to separate yourself from the unranked guys. Joaquin Buckley gets away with not necessarily knowing how to do it because he has power. because he's got the knockout power, because he's a strong guy that can level change and he's got a decent gas tank. That's it. Joe Pyfer and Abdul Razak Alhassan. I'm going to be picking Joe Pyfer to win this fight in the first round by KO. You know what I mean? And this is why. I think that Abdul Razak Alhassan is dangerous. He's coming off of a KO win over Claudio Ribeiro. The last KO we had that was a head kick over Alessio de Chirico. These guys aren't that good. I know that Joe Pyfer's new in the UFC, but I think at this point, man, even with the 2 KOs that we see on his record, GM3, and of course his UFC debut, I forget the guy that he knocked out in his UFC debut. Let me look up his name. But my point is, Russian guy, Ellen Amedovsky. Dude, Joe Pyfer's got unreal power at middleweight, and he's also got a really good frame for middleweight. He's got a long reach. He's got serious quick hands. And I think that although both of these guys have power, Joe Pyfer's power is a little bit more effortless. Like, he doesn't have to put his all into a shot to put someone down. And because of that, I feel like he can flow a little more freely in his combinations. And I think that Abdul Razak Alhassan is the stiff, bodybuilder-esque type of build guy that's going to be a little bit too plotty or a little bit too stiff to get the better of Joe Pyfer. And I think that Joe Pyfer is going to land a really good shot on the chin of Abdul Razak Alhassan early. And I think he's going to put him on his ass. And I think he's going to finish him. There's a night and day difference from the natural striking ability of Joe Pyfer and Abdul. Joe Pyfer is the much, much more natural striker, whereas Abdul, it looks a little bit more forced. And this is the thing that's going to separate Joe Pyfer from the guys that are unranked. It's the natural ability to fight, the natural ability to strike, the natural power. And yeah, for that reason, I'm going to pick Joe Pyfer to win this one by a KO. Abdul has lost to plenty of people that I believe to be on the level of Joe Pyfer or below. Like, again, he's got KO'd by Chaos Williams. I think that Joe Pyfer is a better version of Chaos Williams. And I've seen Abdul get out-grappled before by guys like Joaquin Buckley. I think that Joe Pyfer could also out-grapple him as well. So let's get on to the next one. The main event, Grant Dawson versus Bobby Green. Let's see if we can get back on track. Let's see if we can actually get a main event right. I'm going with Grant Dawson, and I'm going to be picking him by first-round submission, first-round rear naked choke. I think that Grant Dawson is going to beat Bobby Green easily in this fight, okay? And this is why. Grant Dawson, in the first round, when he's at his freshest, is a very strong and explosive grappler. His entries are perfect. His timing when getting the takedowns are perfect. This guy has really good timing. You know what I mean? And his ability to sink in the hooks and to take someone's back is unreal. You know what I mean? The level of speed at which he was able to take Damir Ismagilov's back, the level of speed at which he was able to sink in the hooks, even in the third round against Jared Gordon after a really tough and gritty back and forth when he was tired. I mean, Grant Dawson, even when he's gassed, can put the hooks on someone quickly and can snatch their neck. And I think that this dude, I understand there's no OV at the end of his name, but I honestly do think this guy is one of the most dangerous grapplers in the lightweight division, and I'm talking about the top 10. I think that Grant Dawson is a better grappler than Mateusz Gamrot, and I will say that confidently. All right? It's not by miles. It's not by miles. I'm just going to say if I have to choose Grant Dawson and Mateusz Gamrot, you're going to have 5 opponents lined up for them, the 5 same opponents, and they're going to have to fight them all. Who's going to get the most wins? I'm going to say Grant Dawson's going to beat more people than Mateusz Gamrot with his grappling. I genuinely think that although Bobby Green has a background in wrestling, and this is what his bread and butter was when he first started fighting in MMA before he got into the Philly shell and just flowing with his boxing combinations and wanting to strike and shitting on grapplers, calling them guys that are nut huggers and all this shit. Listen, Bobby Green has gotten smoked by the last grappler that actually was able to impose his will, and that's Makhachev. And you know what? Before that, who was the last grappler he fought? Thiago Moises. Well, if you look at that fight, if you were to watch that fight back, Thiago Moises hardly tried to take Bobby Green down once. And Bobby Green arguably even won that fight. But my point is, we didn't see Thiago Moises try to grapple. And Thiago Moises does not have the same level of submission threat and does not have the same ability to control people as Grant Dawson. And again, let's look at the most recent example of Bobby Green fighting with Tony Ferguson. Yes, he stuffed a couple of takedowns from Tony Ferguson. This is a old man Tony Ferguson whose body is falling apart. He's looked like he's lost about 6-7 pounds of solid muscle tissue throughout the past few years. He's easy to bully around. Grant Dawson used to be a 145-pounder. If you look at Grant Dawson's build now, if you look at his build in his last few fights, the dude is fucking shredded at 155 pounds, and he's big for the division now. He's got small legs, he's got these little chicken legs, but Grant Dawson's got a big back, a shredded back. You know, he's a big lightweight at this point. And although the Bobby Green is still, again, very athletic, he's in shape, he's lean, he's got some muscle on him, I think that there's just a little bit of a strength difference at this point. If you're looking at a guy like Grant Dawson in his early 30s and Bobby Green in his late 30s, there's going to be a little bit of a difference. You know what I mean? We're looking at a guy smack dab in the middle of his prime that's got a fuck ton of momentum, that's coming off of the most dominant win of his entire career that actually put him on the map for most people. Bobby Green, on the other hand, yeah, I feel like Bobby Green might even have 5-6 more fights left in him in the UFC. This guy could go on to be fighting in his 40s, but he just doesn't have that same, he doesn't have the same momentum coming with him to actually catapult himself up there in the rankings. Like, I could see Grant Dawson getting to the top 5 someday. I can't see Bobby Green getting anywhere near the top 5. Bobby Green doesn't necessarily have one-shot KO power. I know that we saw him knock out Al Quinta a year and a half back, one shot. Al Quinta was ring-rusted coming off of a long layoff. I know that Bobby Green, especially this year where we get a lot of upsets, could find the right shot on Grant Dawson moving backwards, because this is the thing. Grant Dawson knows how to impose his will. Grant Dawson, from the get-go, is going to move forward. He's going to stalk down Bobby Green, go at him instantly, try to get a takedown, put the pressure on him, try to blind his vision, and then level change for a takedown. Bobby Green wants people to move forward on him. He's a counter striker for the most part. That's where Bobby Green does his best work, and he's dangerous. And Bobby Green, I am going to say this, he's going to pop the head of Grant Dawson around like a pinball machine early. And I guarantee it, Bobby Green's much faster than Grant Dawson. And I have to say this about Dawson. The guy's striking is ugly. It's very ugly. He's got some ugly striking. In an interview recently, he said something really interesting, and it was this. He said that he's preparing for Islam Makhachev, and he's been preparing for Makhachev for years now. And because he hopes to fight him one day, he has some techniques and some things that he literally has not showed and chooses not to show in his fights because he doesn't want Makhachev to be able to prepare for him in the future. Grant Dawson, I don't know. Is this guy trying to tell us that he's got some secret, really good striking going on? He's got some really good techniques in the striking and the stand-up. Maybe it's just the grappling. But either way, man, I feel like this guy's striking is mediocre as fuck. And he's going to need a takedown. So all I'm saying is if he doesn't get the takedown, Bobby Green will beat the fuck out of this guy. All right? There's no way Grant Dawson goes out there and stands at Bobby Green after struggling to get takedowns and edges it out. No, Bobby Green's going to beat the shit out of him. I just don't see Bobby Green having the one-shot KO power. I think that Grant Dawson's going to be able to eat a couple of shots in order to land one of his own, to set up a takedown. I saw Grant Dawson eat some big shots on the feet against Damir Ismagulov. I've seen Grant Dawson eat some big shots against Jared Gordon. Jared Gordon's a guy that has some pop in his hands. But ultimately, I think that there's just going to be such a big difference in grappling skill and speed of transitions on the ground that Bobby Green's just going to be out of his depths. And I think that Grant Dawson's going to choke him out in the first round. So I think he's going to take Bobby Green down. He's going to set it up with maybe a couple of strikes. He's going to blind the vision of Bobby Green, shoot a single leg. And the thing about Grant Dawson that makes me confident in his ability to get the takedown, he gets really deep on his takedown shots. Like, this guy will get extremely deep on a single leg. He'll get extremely deep on a double leg. He commits fully to takedowns, and he gets them. You know what I mean? Because, again, when he's strong and fresh early on in his fights, he can put his all into a takedown because he can rely on his skill to snatch up your back very quickly. It doesn't take a lot of strength to do that. You're just sinking in the hooks and that. So I think that Grant Dawson's going to be able to take Bobby Green down. I think he's going to be able to sink the hooks in. I think he's going to get mount on Bobby Green. If Bobby doesn't decide to give up his back, I think Bobby will give up his back after that. And I think that Grant Dawson, when both of these guys are dry, I think he's going to take the neck of Bobby Green when Bobby Green gets frustrated. And I feel like after a few minutes of Bobby getting punched in the face, you know, getting his back mounted by Grant Dawson, who's going to be punching him, he's going to have this kind of fuck it attitude and say, oh, fuck. And he's just going to get his neck taken. You know what I mean? I could see Bobby Green getting frustrated in that kind of situation. So Grant Dawson, first round submission, rear naked choke. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I think that Grant Dawson, I'm going to say this right now, I think he's up there right behind a guy like Beneil Dariush. You know what? I honestly feel like Grant Dawson's a more dangerous submission artist than Beneil Dariush in some ways, but he's right up there with Beneil. You know what I mean? He's closing in on Beneil. He's not up there with Charles and Makhachev yet. We're not going to say that. But this is the top 4. Man, I don't know. I mean, you also got Arman Tsarukyan. They're up there, but he's a top 5 grappler in the division. I will say that for sure. For sure. There's no one else that I'm going to put ahead of Grant Dawson to be in the top 5. You know what I mean? It's him, it's Arman, it's Beneil, it's Charles, and it's Makhachev. And that's a strong top 5. Grant Dawson's not a guy that's at the bottom. He's not at the bottom of the barrel. You know, he's right there in the middle. So just wait on it. If you guys haven't seen this guy's fights back, just watch this guy grapple. Watch the level of speed at which he's able to transition and get into really dominant positions. And again, the hustle. Grant Dawson's hustle, his heart, he's got it all. Even through adversity, even rounds in which he's losing, he's able to get submissions at the end of those rounds because he's non-stop gunning for the finish. And I think that his cardio is going to definitely be a factor in this fight. So even if he doesn't get the finish early, I think he's going to be able to get the finish in the later rounds because I just feel like he's going to have a little more heart than Bobby Green. I think his cardio is going to be a little bit better. I think he's going to make it a physical fight. And I don't think he's going to give Bobby Green the chance to really get going on the feet. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Until next time. What's up, guys? It's Lucas Tracy MMA, and I'm wondering if you're trying to look like Yoel Romero. Well, if you don't have his genetics, that's impossible. But I could at least help you get halfway there with my Ultimate Lifting program, and if you're a beginner, my Novice Lifting program. These are programs that I've used my 9 years of experience in the gym to make so that you can put on as much muscle as possible in as little amount of time as possible. And it'll also give you a variety of workouts so that you never get tired of the gym. So if you're interested, click the link in my description. And for a discount, use code MMA for 30% off.